Hi, thanks for joining me. I hope you're staying safe, that you are well, and that you're not too anxious. We'll return to the subject of the anxiety or the lack of it a bit later. First, an old tin. It's a tin taken from my dad's toolkit, which, don't tell my brother or sisters, but I decided to inherit. And more on inheritance in a moment, too. And it's taken from around the time I was born, and it's Type B Fleet Air Arm rations. I expect it was the same in the RAF. For pilots who would be flying for periods of time without being able to stop and get a meal or something like that, and needed to keep their blood sugar up. So this tin, there must have been thousands. He must have thrown dozens away, but this one he decided to keep some fishing tackle in and some old nails. And I've recently unearthed it and thought, well, don't want to put this in the recycling. It's as old as me. Anyway, went online. Turns out it's worth 25 quid, 25 British pounds. So if you want to put a bid in, you can. I'm not going to sell it to you though, because probably you're the same. We keep some stuff that's a little odd, really. I mean, it's just a throwaway tin. It's nothing. I'm not even interested in the contents anymore. I'm interested in the tin because it, over the years, I suppose, it's acquired a meaning, and I come across it and go, oh look, this is about as old as I am, and it's one of my dad's, etc. And so it takes on a meaning. And I'm thinking a lot right now about how we, under the COVID-19 restrictions, are discovering what it is to be the church, actually, and not a building focused group of people. The container that we normally meet in is worth something, and over the years, we come to hold it in some affection. But this particular time under the COVID-19 restrictions is a time when we're discovering, remembering something we hold very dear to be true, which is that the container itself, the building from which we may get quite a lot of our identity and sense of belonging, is in the end just a building. The church is us. And since we can't meet in the building, that's a lesson that's being strongly reinforced for us. The coronavirus emergency, the worldwide pandemic, is a slow explosion, bringing absolute horror in its wake. And it's still unfolding. It's not like it was a slow explosion. It is continuing to explode. To some, it has brought the devastation of losses of a loved ones, their own death, their own suffering, and many sort of extra things which are not in the mainstream of what we'd immediately think of, but which actually brings suffering, hurt, and difficulty to people. For many of us, very many of us, probably the majority, we haven't been devastated by this explosion, but we fear being devastated by it. We're forced to rethink because we realize that what we count upon being dependable, that tomorrow always comes, is actually not so dependable as we often think. And we're living with a constant uncertainty. Depending on your personality and experience, you may bury your head in the sand to deal with constant uncertainty, just don't want to think about it, so you distract yourself and ignore it. There's a whole range of other responses, right up to frantic anxiety that can never settle or sleep, and everything in between. And I just want to suggest that it's not best to ignore, it's not best to fret, it's best to look it in the eye and resolve it and come to terms with it. Did life used to feel safer? Well, not for everybody in the world. If you lived in Syria, say, as some of our church family did, um, through the war and the uncertainties and the refugee camps and everything else, then, well, every day was filled with uncertainty. But for most of us who are likely to be watching this video, days have been a lot more certain than they are now. And we can feel very unsettled. And if we ourselves are not suffering too much from that, we need to be sensitive to the fact that all around us in our community will be people who are struggling with what's going on and who are feeling anxious about today, tomorrow, and beyond. Talking of tomorrow, are there any childhood sayings that confused you at the time? Things you heard and you thought, I understand that. I seem to have a lot of them. One of them was, tomorrow never comes. I remember thinking, yeah, it does, every day. Guaranteed. I wake up, tomorrow's here. And now there's a new one, and I'll wake up tomorrow, and that'll be here too. In fact, it's the opposite. Tomorrow always comes. At least it did throughout my childhood, it did throughout my life until now. A few dips along the way where it might not have done, but our pattern of life gets us into thinking a particular way. Tomorrow always comes. Well, except one day, tomorrow won't come, will it? But we do expect it. It's just that right now we're being reminded that actually it's not guaranteed. What we're waking up to is our vulnerability. We've been used to feeling safer, and we're being reminded that there's no guarantee of tomorrow at all. So, to the teaching of Jesus that I think will help us with this. The scene is that somebody has come up to him, or somebody from the crowd where he's teaching one day, and says that you ought to get my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Wasn't an old tin from an ancient time. It was the land that they needed for everyday life for themselves and their families on into the future. One brother, presumably a younger one, feels he's not being treated fairly by his older brother, who would have taken over most of the father's responsibilities. So it seems natural for him to turn to Jesus and say, well, you seem to be somebody of significance. You have a good sense of justice. You believe in fairness. Talk to my brother for me, because he's not being fair. Jesus' response has led to some of his most famous teaching. First of all, he says to the guy, I don't accept the appointment you're trying to give me. I'm not going to judge between you and your brother. And then he goes on to speak to, I guess, the same guy, the disciples and the crowd who are listening to him. And he says, just watch out for what you depend upon to give life its meaning, its purpose, and its security. What does a person's life really consist of? Because it's not their possessions. A person hasn't got more life because they own more than somebody who owns less. Ownership of stuff's a waste of effort for the most part. It tends to grab hold of us in a way that's really, really unhelpful. And he just drives this question. So what does life really consist of? What matters? And he tells a parable. I remember, we'll share the parable, this is an outline again, it's in the reading, but I remember on the island of Lundy years and years and years ago with a pickaxe, scoring out a drainage channel for the beach road. It took hours, in fact, more than hours, back-breaking work, but it did create through the solid rock a drainage channel. And when I'd finished it, I felt a bit proud. I thought, well, nothing else I ever do in life will be here after I've gone, but this will be. This'll last for probably hundreds of years. And so long after I've gone, it'll be here, doing its job, draining the water off the road. Bit sad some years later to go back and find that somebody had taken a pneumatic drill, replaced my hard work, probably in the space of an hour and a half or something, and created a concrete channel in its place. And I thought, well, that's my mark on the world, gone forever. Jesus tells this story. So there's a man, and he's a farmer, and he owns a lot of land. He has a superb harvest, so he sets it all on one side and says, right, never going to work again, going to just eat, drink and be merry, because I've got years and years ahead of me. All I'll have to do is just replace my barns with bigger ones. Reminds me of exactly what a farmer did in the village where I grew up in my teenage years, did exactly that, and the same thing happened. Then God says to him, well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? You're about to die. What's going to happen now? All that set up for the future you thought you'd have, but you're not going to have it. And now you don't even know who's going to get all that you laid up for yourself. And his conclusion comes to, that's how it is for people who focus on becoming rich in the wrong things instead of the things of God. And he goes on to say, when you're rich in the things of God, you can actually dispose of your possessions, look after the poor, because you're no longer frightened of the circumstances. In fact, he says, look at the birds of the air, look at the flowers of the field. You don't need to provide for yourself what God is already going to provide for you. So don't waste your time on what you can't keep. Don't waste your effort as if it mattered on things that don't actually matter. Don't waste yourself on the wrong things. And don't waste too much anxiety on the things that God knows that you need. Rather, trust him and seek the kingdom. It doesn't mean go looking for something you haven't got in this context. It means seek that the kingdom comes on earth as it is in heaven, like we pray in the Lord's Prayer. It means try and make some kingdom things happen instead. That's what will really count and what will really matter. Free from fear of loss, you're free to be able to be incredibly generous to those who need your generosity. It's a great life lesson. It's one we all know and fail to learn. And maybe right now, when we're having to review our priorities, when life doesn't have the certainty and the patterns of life are no longer as predictable as they've been, is a good time to say, well, yeah, but what actually matters? Because a lot of people are saying to me that this period of time is reminding them of some of the really important things in life. And that in fact, being on lockdown may have its frustrations and certainly has its problems, but it also resets your priorities, helps you notice some things you've overlooked, and hopefully helps us spot what really matters. It does matter if people are suffering. It does matter that people are dying. It does matter that people are in grief. It does matter that this is global. It does matter that many people will have to face it without the resources available to people in this country. What's priority for you? Jesus said, make sure it's being rich towards God.